Chapter 3. Burlum and Niagara sit down to watch TV. Perhaps involuntarily aroused curiosity about these new TV shows that his co-workers kept talking about convinced Burlum to reconnect his TV to the outside world, or perhaps it was Niagara's subtle hints about the inadequacy of their DVD collection, or perhaps even the inescapable profusion of technological innovation. But the result was that Burlum did indeed find himself faced with a host of new TV watching options. One Saturday evening, he and his wife sat down in the TV room and began scrolling through the programs available to them. "That looks good," Niagara pointed at the screen just as the picture she was indicating was replaced by another. Burlum scrolled back, using the complicated controller that the TV service installation man had incompletely explained to him. "That's it," Niagara halted Burlum's hunt. The show was called Lust Brigade. The picture accompanying the title was a bikini-clad woman drenched in blood threatening a man dressed only in a pair of overalls with phallic-tipped garden shears. The word comedy was displayed below the title. Burlum's lips parted slightly as he turned in horror and disgust to his wife. "You've got to be kidding," he said. Niagara pressed her lips together and sighed through her nose. "Keep going," she instructed, waving at the screen. Burlum shook his head and started thumbing through the lists again. He stopped every so often, examining the picture and reading the description. "No," he drawled. "What about that one?" Niagara asked. "I read something about it in a magazine." "What magazine?" "Something at the store." The grocery store, thought Burlum. Some tabloid. How good could it be if it was one of those kind of programs? However, he didn't want to be a complete jerk. "What's it about?" he asked. "I'm not sure. Something about the mafia?" The mafia. The most overused theme in American entertainment. "I'll tell you what. If we don't find something else, we'll come back to it, okay?" Niagara seemed to settle further back into her place on the couch. "Okay," she agreed. Burlum found something else, only a couple of items further along in the parade of offerings. "Hey!" he suddenly barked, amazed that he'd actually come upon something that looked interesting. "What about that?" The show was called Captain Catfish's 13th Knob. The picture was of an actor from Burlum's childhood, Dan Mountanian, grown bearded and stout, dressed as a high-seas candy salesman. He stood beside a young woman in a leather jacket. The two were staring at some distant potential with resolution and purpose. "That's Dan Mountanian," Burlum enthused. "He used to be on Bionic Grizzly Tornado." "All right, let's watch it," Niagara urged. She seemed resigned to indulging her husband in whatever he chose. "You're sure?" He was on the verge of offering her the chance to go back to the sexually alluring people who hurt other people for fun, but couldn't bring himself that far along the road of gentlemanly behavior. Captain Catfish's 13th Knob. Captain Catfish's 13th Knob was Dan Mountanian's fourth TV show. He had started out on a short-lived western called Cruddy Boots, on which he had been part of an ensemble. His first starring role was on his second show, Diffuser's Mudworks. This is the show that made him a household name. It only ran for 2 years, however. A year later, he took on the title role in Bionic Grizzly Tornado, the premise of which was that Mountanian's character, a secret agent of the government of the state of California, is unjustly accused of the killing of a foreign delegate and forced to hide out in an isolated cabin in the mountains. There he has a series of adventures with the woodland creatures and wandering celebrities that come within the scope of his bionic powers. These powers were granted to him by a physician experimenting with the healing nature of electricity after a carriage accident left Mountanian's carefully shaved ursine body broken and paralyzed. The show ran 4 years, becoming more and more outlandish and silly, even as its budget inexorably shrank to a pittance. After Bionic Grizzly Tornado's cancellation, Mountanian did a series of poorly received and barely seen TV movies before the opportunity to star in another show came. This show was Captain Catfish's 13th Knob. Captain Catfish was about an aging maritime candy salesman caught up in a world of magical intrigue along with a mysterious young woman from the future. Only the pullulation of television networks in the digital age made the production of the show possible. As excited as Mountanian was to return to TV, it was perhaps the suggestion that a line of toys connected with the show might be produced that excited him more. He was thrilled that a new generation of fans associated him with the role of Captain Catfish, although his character's actual name was Richard Button, shouting out Captain Catfish when they saw him buying donuts or attending some inane Hollywood gathering. "I'm particularly keen on the idea of playsets based on individual episodes," he told a fellow actor as the two sipped coffee outside an oceanside surf shop. Wasn't Bionic Grizzly Tornado heavily merchandised? Asked the other man, an actor known for his contempt for the film industry and the cult of celebrity. This attitude, carefully cultivated by a team of managers and press agents, had helped him land such roles as the meat merchant in Vengeance of the Thirsty and Ezekiel in Lust Brigade. Mountanian nodded emphatically, mouth full of coffee. I've still got a box full of the coloring books somewhere. Could be worth something, the other actor, blessed with the name Grant Oakwood, opined. He would later speak of his close friendship with Mountanian, citing it as an example of just what an outsider he was. You wouldn't catch him hobnobbing with the elite on Mustique. Mountanian conjured visions of action figures bearing a vague likeness to himself, accessorized with tiny plastic adventure equipment. Perhaps, he suddenly realized, the show would achieve such popularity that posters would be printed up. It was imperative that he establish a good rapport with his co-star, Chagrin d'Amour. If the fans felt that they were friends in real life as well as on the screen, it could only further their devotion to the show. Don't limit your imagination, Oakwood advised. Why, the amount of items that can be licensed is infinite. Did you know they're coming out with a brand of Lust Brigade beer? Mountanian looked suitably impressed. Yep, Oakwood nodded. The bottles will have pictures of everybody in the cast. I can't wait to get drunk on something that has my picture on the bottle. The authority of the Lobster King remains undiminished. Richard Button, known to his associates on the high seas of the international candy trade as Captain Catfish, explained the significance of the superfluous knob attached to his antique pocket watch. It automatically sets the time back 1 hour, he told Carlene, the mysterious young woman who had recently come out of nowhere, saved him and his boat from the one-armed albino kraken, and joined him on his cruise to the Fat Womack's Islands. Is that useful? Carlene asked. The captain glanced at his new partner out of the corner of his eye. It can be, he replied. What about all those other knobs, she asked, pointing at the watch. Just standard watch knobs, the same as any other sailor's timepiece. Captain Catfish quickly shoved the watch back into the cavernous pocket of his long burgundy coat. Any further questioning by the young woman was forestalled by the sudden appearance of 2 large black-eyed crustaceans riding on personal submersible devices. They bobbed up from the depths beside the captain's battered old candy tug. Before any preventative measures could be taken, the 2 interlopers had drawn strange-looking weapons and clambered up the sides to confront the 2 heroes. The Lobster King extends an invitation to you both, one of them said, his accent seemingly that of a native of Alabama. Any chance of turning down this polite offer? The captain asked. Sorry, Catfish. Carlene's hand slowly moved to the thin strip of plastic she kept in the holster on her belt, but the captain halted her action. He shook his head firmly. We might learn something, he said in an undertone. Besides, he continued in a louder voice, not taking his eyes off the 2 creatures before him, I've always found His Majesty to be honorable. I'm sure he appreciates your opinion, the pink-shelled functionary returned. So, leaving the ship adrift in the midst of the Atlantic, Terence Bazul had not yet joined the cast as the ne'er-do-well cook Dong. Captain Catfish and Carlene allowed themselves to be taken below the waves to visit the Lobster King. Are you wondering how we're able to breathe underwater? The captain shouted to Carlene from his seat behind one of their crustacean abductors. Not really, she shouted back. I'm familiar with ghost duplication, transhydration mobility. The captain merely flattened his mouth into a thin line and turned his attention back to the rapidly approaching ocean floor. Only moments later, he and Carlene were being prodded through a tangle of seaweed into the presence of the Lobster King, standing resplendent on his tail with his back facing them on top of a huge open clamshell. He was surrounded by open chests of sunken treasure, courtiers in the forms of mermaids, men in diving suits, bloated sailors, and fishes of all sizes and colors. Captain Richard Button, the Lobster King vocalized, yet who can say from what organ or orifice that regal Gregory Peck-like voice issued, for one could not see any obvious source such as anthropomorphic lips. And Carlene, woman from the future. Although his position remained unchanged, and his eyes seemed just as inscrutably dead as ever, the big lobster, and he really was a big lobster, seemed to turn his attention solely to the captain's companion. Are you aware, Captain, of the danger you harbor in your hold? This woman smells of trouble, and I have an excellent nose, he continued, the centerpiece of a tasty tableau. Really? Captain Catfish replied, peering intently at the undersea monarch. I can't see one. Stillborn billiards compact away. At this point, the captain's watch began chiming out the tune of the old shanty. Recount the days of your happiness and success, forestalling any angry rejoinder on the part of the king. What does that indicate? Carling asked. It means it's time to press the 13th knob. The captain held out his left hand. With the other, he drew out his watch. Take my hand, Carling. No, the Lobster King bellowed. You don't know what you're doing. Think of the sea. With a smile, Carling took the captain's outstretched hand. The captain pressed the 13th knob on his watch before any of the assembled court members could do anything about it. As the fish and the deep-sea divers dashed to the spot where the two heroes stood, they were met with nothing but tiny bubbles. Damn, the Lobster King declared. Out of a vortex of black and white, Captain Catfish and Carling emerged into an otherwise empty metal room. Their clothes, as well as their hair, were dry. As the captain searched the room, evidently for a hidden door, Carling stared at him with mouth agog. I didn't know you could do that, she gasped. Thought you were the only one? He smiled crookedly, still hunting for the door. You knew? Her face took on a wariness now as she mastered her shock. I suspected. The captain pressed a recessed latch. Ah! He exclaimed as the hidden door swung open, revealing a long corridor. Where does this lead? Carling asked as she joined him. You tell me. You're the one from the future. This was said in such a way as to imply that the captain was from the past. However, it is likely that only someone familiar with the show would realize that. It was very subtle. Carling frowned as she looked up at the captain's tangled locks. She shouldered past him and headed down the corridor. Hey, wait, the captain hissed. You don't know what's down there. Historical reject, muttered the young woman. There were several openings on either side of the corridor, each one leading to a large, comfortable office appointed with modern furniture and many houseplants. Is this a business of some sort? Carling asked as she and the captain ransacked the drawers of the desk in one of these offices. The captain raised his eyebrows in a denial of certainty. Hey, look, fish! He pointed at a small aquarium bubbling softly in the dimly lit room. Odd to see them in this tiny subset of the ocean. He put his finger into the water and made a humming sound. What are you doing? Asking them who works here, he continued to hum. Well, the captain removed his finger and licked it clean. He shook it vigorously and held it to his ear. No response. Maybe the batteries are dead. Carling stared at the big man for a couple of seconds. Do you know, Captain, I am beginning to wonder whether I made the right decision in choosing you as my partner in this struggle against the forces of evil. Forces of evil, the captain mocked. I would have thought you Dawn-timers had finally dispensed with moral absolutes. A chic cowl protected his beak from the endosphere. Observing the captain's and Carling's activities from a darkened laboratory equipped with rather primitive-looking surveillance monitors, the bird fellow, Bill Warrow, grunted with satisfaction. He turned to face the viewer. In truth, he was facing some as-yet unidentified interlocutor, but Burla Managra and all the other people watching the show didn't know that. When he spoke, he could just as well have been delivering a monologue, and said, For far too long we have demonized our enemies, intentionally misconstruing their motives, claiming that what they really want, that what they really stand for, is either our complete subjugation or the destruction of all life. In truth, our enemies usually want more or less the same things that we do, if we but look at them and ourselves objectively. There is wisdom in your words, birdfellow, came the voice of him to whom this speech had been addressed. However, if we become too understanding, too balanced in our viewpoints, we run the risk of losing the will to fight. Arjuna's dilemma, Bill Warrow commented. Well, not exactly. The other person, now revealed as a humanoid lion in an olive-green tunic, demurred. He turned his attention to another of the monitors, pointing at it with a furry finger. What's happening there? He asked. An interesting case, Bill Warrow replied. A team of one-armed seamstresses is making me a new cowl. They believe they have been contracted for the job by a major Hollywood studio, but it is I that will wear the completed garment. What's wrong with the one you're wearing now? The lion man asked. This? Bill Warrow caught up the edge of the cape that was every much a part of his cowl as it is the tip of the tail of a diplodocus is the faraway head. He fingered the black woolen material as he spoke. It's okay, I guess, but it's really not formal enough for the domination of all existence. He chuckled at his joke. The lion man joined him after a moment. Later, having left the secret laboratory observation cubicle, the lion man, identified now by a subtitle as Mr. Paws, strolled with placid confidence down a pleasantly decorated corporate corridor, nodding here and there to the secretaries and junior executives he met. He turned the corner into a much narrower passageway that led to a door set at an uncomfortable angle to the wall of the passageway itself. The paint on the door was sloppily applied and chipped. Several cartoons cut from magazines were taped to it, obscuring who knows what further sign signs of decrepitude the portal bore. After one peremptory knock, the lion man opened the door and squeezed within. Behind the door was a tiny office. Behind the desk inside the tiny office sat Whiskers, the cat man, differentiated from Mr. Paws, the lion man, by being more clearly derived from a house cat. "How did it go?" Whiskers asked. "Oh, fine, fine." Mr. Paws took a seat in the only chair of the room besides the one behind the desk. Shelves full of books surrounded the two feline primates. "Did he explain what the endosphere is?" "He tried," admitted Mr. Paws, "but his explanation fell far short of my standards." "Well, did he explain how it could damage his beak?" He said the word beak with evident scorn. "Sort of. I couldn't make any sense out of it." Whiskers threw down his pen with which he had been idly doodling. "Then I don't understand how he can justify expending valuable resources with his endless purchases of custom-made cowls and capes." "I judge a man by the degree to which he busies himself with trivia." Near the end of the working day, Whiskers sat back in his chair and stared about him. All these books, he thought. How many of them had he actually read? Not many. In fact, not all of them were his. Most of them had come with the office. He had brought some from home. But even among these, the number he had read was low. Still, books fascinated him. He opened the central drawer of the old desk and withdrew his manuscript. False Straw Eclipsed by Downy Brew, it was called. He hadn't worked on it in months. By his reckoning, it was only about a third finished. "It's supposed to be a novel," he said to himself. However, he stood up and worked his way over to the bookshelf to the right of the door. "It's not really one continuous narrative. It's a bunch of random incidents strung together into a..." He searched for a metaphor of unique precision. "A charm bracelet," he finished, his eyes brightening at his success. He reached out and pulled the book from the shelf just before his eyes. He mused. "Never looked at this one before." It was titled "The Really Good Concept of the Utility Jumble." A small book. Its cover was red and bore the cartoon image of an alligator man stamped in gold. The alligator man was wearing a tie and carrying a fish in one hand. Whiskers was stunned to see that the author's name was Grover Cleveland. "It can't be," he declared, opening the book to the frontispiece. Surely enough, there was a picture of the late president opposite the title page. "I never knew he wrote a book, much less a... Wait a minute, maybe it's not fiction." Whiskers scanned through the pages, but despite the presence of the dialogue, could not determine the nature of the book exactly. He took the book back to his desk. He found that the book was littered with strange diagrams and graphs. "I didn't know they used graphs of this type way back then," he thought. As he came across a passage intriguing enough for him to begin reading in depth, he had little idea that he was being observed through a complex array of mirrors terminating in the barely utile ventilation grate over his head. "Can you make out what he's reading?" the white-haired man in the domino asked Beale Warrow. "Perhaps if I adjust the magnification," the bird fellow mumbled, reaching out with his manual wing adapter to twist a bright orange knob. "What's that say?" the masked man wondered, standing up and peering into the glass. "The Really Good Concept of the Utility Jumble," Warrow read the title aloud. The white-haired man sat back down. He rubbed his plump jaw as he mused on this revelation. "You know it?" Warrow asked his companion. The man's eyes moved back and forth. "I've heard of it. It was supposedly written by Grover Cleveland, but..." "Wait a minute," Warrow interrupted. "You mean Grover Cleveland, the president?" "Yes, Grover Cleveland, the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms." "You know, I've always found him fascinating for that very reason." "Yes, in many ways he was the first modern president." "Oh, I find that highly debatable. I mean, arguably you could make that claim for someone as early as Lincoln or as late as Theodore Roosevelt. But no one any later than that. Well, perhaps FDR, but in truth I think you have to consider the fact that the term modernism and all that it implies finds its beginnings during the approximate parameters of the first Roosevelt's administration. The bird fellow made brackets in the air with the tips of his vestigial wings. False Straw Eclipsed by Downy Brew. Only moments later the two focused their attention on the manuscript lying on Whisker's desk. "False Straw Eclipsed by Downy Brew," Warrow read aloud, "by Whisker's Clown Ring." He frowned as far as he was able. "Did you know his last name was Clown Ring?" "I didn't even know he had a last name," confessed the unknown person seated beside the bird fellow. "I thought he was one of those guys with just one name, like Moses, Erasmus, or Lucky." "Lucky?" "The Trix Rabbit." "Ah," Warrow nodded, the tip of his beak protruding from beneath his cowl. The tip was slightly discolored and flecked with spots like the forehead of a very old elephant. This was from exposure to the endosphere, which previously cows were inadequate to protect against. Too bad we can't read the manuscript, the man continued. I'd like to know just what kind of fantasies our friend the Catman entertains in that fuzzy head of his. Well, we can read the first page at least, Werrow pointed out, using the orange knob to bring Whisker's book into closer view, so that it filled the looking glass. Together the two men read, occasionally obstructed by Whisker's elbow. False straw eclipsed by downy brew by Whisker's clown ring. Had I minded the store-bought lemonade, the defining wall on Wednesday would be wed. But such is the jilting one endures from the tilting of the earth itself. The chapel was in the tiny village of Deadbeast. Some have said it was the tiniest village in all England, but my father once lived in one completely contained within the basement of a mandatory reporting for drug test failure. Whatever the book of facts statistic was, Deadbeast was still a very tiny village, being nothing more than 2 old stone buildings on either side of a dirt road somewhere out in the country. The chapel was in one of the buildings, and the tavern was in the other. Sitting in the tavern was a youngish man dressed entirely in orange. This youngish man was definitely not me, who am powered by nudist Christians. The first thing the heathen does after accepting Christ is to put on clothes, so said the headmaster of a private Christian school I attended. This same man also said, I don't even know why you'd want to go to a place called the Hard Rock Cafe. Look at the 3 elements in the name. Hard, meaning hard, not soft. Rock, the music of the devil, and cafe, a place to drink beer. The cartouche device has brought me to reject the Republican Party and its religious bedmates. The cartouche device had brought the man in the orange suit to Deadbeast, to sit and watch and wait, drinking the local ginger beer and being as inconspicuous as possible. But what is this cartouche device, my students later asked me. In replying, I first acknowledged the weighty debt I owed to even the most diabolic of influences. Although beloved of the gods, Motley Crue was never a very good route. I was fooled for a long time, but now I know that even the worst of times can be a delight as long as one has oneself and the sure knowledge of that possession. This, then, is the key to the so-called cartouche device, although, my God, it's terrible, Bill Werrow declared after scanning the masked man's face to see that he had also finished the dreadful first page. I readily admit that it is so. You have a god? The white-haired man asked, somewhat contemptuously. Sure, Werrow replied, smiling at the discomfiture that his theism must cause his associate. The really good concept of the utility jumble. In my travels, so wrote former President Grover Cleveland, I have met many different types of people. However, it has been impressed upon me after much experience that we are all brothers in Christ. The naked African tribesman dancing his pagan dance during some loathsome reproductive rite is, could he but grasp the concept, kin to the most elegant lady in a manor house in Europe or America through the saving blood sacrifice of our Lord. Of course, I have never actually met a naked African tribesman, but I have been to Africa and there dined with some of the most elegant ladies that Europe or America has produced. It is truly one of the wonders of our modern age that one may go to sleep in a well-appointed cabin in the luxury liner and wake up to find that one shall that very morning be whisked high into the sky on the wings of a metal bird to commune in the spirit with fellow believers under the warm rays of Helios. I have often wondered what my life might have been like had I been born only 21 miles north of my father's house over the border in Canada land. Would the miracle-working blood of Jesus still have guided me to the practice of law and not to the dancing of the mating season and ritualized nudist frenzy? But such fantastic theorizing is probably best left to the writers of speculative works, such as Mr. Wells and his ilk. By way of further illumination, allow me to mention that I have been to the United Kingdom, and there dined with both the captain of industry in his lordly house, and with the simple tradesman on a rude bench somewhere. It is to these experiences that I turn when requested to extemporize on the subject of the worldwide brotherhood of Christ and its effect on the commodities market. Only peace, my friend, can ensure the continued prosperity that our heliocentric system has thus far showered us with, like so many moist droplets of rain against which nudity is no foil, unlike a quality suit of wool and an umbrella of silk. Allow me to recount the gist of a conversation I had with the late Billy Sunday, the origin of which was our chance sharing of a rude bench somewhere. There could be no more striking contrast between our two forms should one have happened upon the scene fresh from one sunrise swim in the old pond. He in his restrictive uniform of evangelical sporting metaphor, and I in my woolen garments and graham cracker executive branch anticipatory counter-progressivism. In my recollection, it was Mr. Sunday who opened the conversation, speaking through teeth like tiny yellow boiled kernels of corn. I think H.G. Wells is a pagan, he declared with all the seriousness of one privy to the current occupancy of hell itself. Well, I considered as I watched the parade of morning swimmers making their way from the old pond backed up the hill to the sanatorium, their nudity, or the state of being sky-clad, as the professor prefers to say, bothering me not in the least. I have no first-hand knowledge of his sartorial condition, but I would say that, based on what I have read of his writings, that he is, at the very least, a denier of the divine. And what is the state of your own soul, sir? The former ball-player asked. I mused, wondering what the spiritual equivalent of skyclad is. I am a believer in the saving power of the blood of Jesus Christ, I replied finally, sensing that my musings were insoluble. Yes, but what are you doing about it? Mr. Sunday's eyes possessed an unusual intensity. I felt that I was looking into the depths of some recently burgled safe. Doing about it, I repeated. Doing about it, my dear. So I am traveling the world, spreading the word of the sun's warming rays, casting my... But Mr. Sunday was not listening. His attention was captivated by one of Dawn's children stepping boldly across the grassy sward. Much of the motorized box is thick with fruit. The fruit that we snacked on was harvested from inside the works. It hung from the nests of fungus that had accumulated on the ceiling. Strange, this fruit, Officer Graymarket noted, taking a bite. What do you think it tastes like? I sniffed the ends of my fingers. It's sort of like ketchup, isn't it? You mean catsup? I frowned. The security man must be from some other part of the country. Is that how you spell it? I asked. It's implied by the way it's pronounced. I couldn't take any more of this, and I had been having a good time. Well, I ordered, you know what to do with this load. Yes. Where are you going? I'm going out, just for a moment. You know, Graymarket pointed a grimy little finger at me, what that President Cleveland guy said, right? Yeah, I know. I shrugged off his clumsy solicitation and headed out past all the disconnected machinery and old enthusiasms. Just past this was the edge of the ceiling. Some people called it nature. The sun, while providing wonderful illumination on this particular day, was not coming through with the warmth. There's light without heat for you. And our conceptions have destroyed the old mental images of the so-called outside. When I stepped out among the unkept grasses and roadside detritus, I felt lost, adrift. These trees that live in silence for centuries are rooted to the earth. But I must have a home, a little house, and inside. I checked this plastic receptacle nailed to a board upright in the ground. Nothing but a small leaf. In a way, I wasn't upset at the lack of communication. Let them all wait. I stepped back under the ceiling with a resolution to take up my duties with a light heart, understanding, of course, that heart was a metaphor for one's determined emotional state. Only the lottery can disappoint you more consistently than misunderstood metaphor, except possibly an incongruous emotional range. As a female, it becomes more and more necessary for me to pinpoint the source of my misery, or should such a thing occur, my euphoria. The expanse of the ceiling was dimly lit by the stage at the far end of the box. I couldn't see the stage from where I was. There was too much junk in the way. However, I could see the light thrown up from the stage. They were having auditions down there. Can you imagine this place full of people? Officer Graymarket asked, stepping beside me from out of the shadows. I twisted my head until my neck popped. No, I said, taking a breath. I can't. What's it like outside? Graymarket asked, gesturing behind me with his chin. His hands were in his pockets as if he was cold. Maybe he was, but I could never sympathize with anyone whose personal temperature was different from mine. After all, they never had any sympathy for me when I was uncomfortable. The very memory of it was aesthetically disturbing. Niagara ponders. Niagara had decided that she didn't like Captain Catfish's 13th knob before the first commercial. She made no comment, however. If it made Burlum happy, and it appeared to, he was smiling at the appearance of his childhood hero and interjecting brief reminiscences of memorable scenes from the actor's career. That was what mattered. Still, she would have preferred to have watched Lust Brigade. It had been heavily advertised during the mornings as Niagara sat before the TV folding clothes or doing some other chore. As she sat thinking about Piano People, the daytime soap opera she intermittently kept up with, Niagara wondered if Burlum would want to have sex tonight. She wasn't quite ready for it should he initiate intercourse. She was at the moment insufficiently supplied with nether lubricant. Normally she tanked up at the end of every week, but this week she had been unable to do so due to a shortage at the convenience store. Niagara wondered if Burlum would get upset if she either refused him or suggested that they use some alternate medium of lubrication, such as olive oil. She rarely initiated sex. Still unsure as to her husband's exact requirements in this field, she limited her sexual aggression to special occasions. Her training at the factory had been almost non-existent. Some customers preferred it that way. She began to open her mouth to ask Burlum if he'd like to talk about the subject, but Captain Catfish appeared to be in a particularly troublesome situation, so she kept quiet. As a robot, Niagara's personal growth was slow. She had been implanted with love for Burlum on activation of marital attachment, but this love had, on combining with her own growing awareness of self, grown from the baseline emotion the factory provided to one of those open-pit natural gas fires that nobody seems to know how to put out. She wondered if in time this flame would get so big and uncontrollable that it would burn out her brain. It was one of her beliefs, based on over a year of cohabitation with Burlum, that human people had a limit to how much they could love another person. Of course, she could see Burlum's faults. This ridiculous TV show, for example. She was already dreading a regular rendezvous with the captain and his unrealistically attractive companion, should Burlum decide to get thoroughly involved with it. Perhaps she could take up a hobby, something to do while he watched TV. But watching TV together seemed to give Burlum such satisfaction, something to do with his childhood, no doubt. And that brought up an awkward subject: parenthood. Being a robot, Niagara obviously could not conceive. There were artificial methods, but they were expensive. She had been lucky that Burlum had been able to afford her in the first place. As much as she imagined that she would enjoy being a mother, it was simply too much to expect, much less ask for. No, there was no way she could even broach the subject. She had no idea how Burlum would respond. Most of all, she feared that he would think she was expressing some sort of dissatisfaction with her existence. As the program drew to a close, Niagara tried to gauge Burlum's reactions. Had he really liked it? Would he want to watch it again? She inconspicuously adjusted her ankles and feet. She had put them on standby for the duration of the show. Now she readied them in case she was asked to accompany Burlum to bed. "I wonder what this is," Burlum said as he idly changed channels. With half her mind puzzling over Burlum's unusual continued TV watching, Niagara put the other half to work on the question of whether or not television could properly be said to have channels anymore.